The North is the kind of place where even the snow has an attitude. It doesn't just fall. It falls like, I'm dropping for dramatic effect. Brace yourself, something big is coming. And the forest beyond the wall is basically an abandoned amusement park where people wander in just to disappear for fun. That night, the wind blew so hard, it felt like winter was trying to apply for permanent residency in this land. The Night's Watch Patrol, brave, strong, and criminally underpaid, pressed deeper into the woods. Each man tried his best to look like, I fear nothing, but the way they kept darting their eyes left and right like unemployed cats made it clear they were terrified. The Night's Watch was famously known as society's recycling bin, but at least they still knew how to be afraid. Afraid of wildlings, afraid of blizzards, and especially afraid of getting off shift early in the literal sense. When they found the first corpse, their fear leveled up instantly. Because the body wasn't lying like a dead person, it was positioned like someone had arranged it for a post-apocalyptic art exhibition. Arms and legs bent at angles only bones or dolls could tolerate. The air was so cold, they figured this guy didn't die from being killed. He died from emotionally freezing to death. Probably the wildlings, one man said. Yeah? Since when did wildlings get art degrees? The guy next to him shot back, face paler than the snow. Then a sound echoed behind them. Soft, but not soft like wind. Soft like something slender, razor cold, and very displeased about being disturbed. They turned. A pale figure appeared. Tall, thin, calm, like someone used to the idea that the living scream whenever they see him. Its eyes were blue, like two prehistoric ice stones left in a freezer no one opens anymore. Every step it took made the snow crack lightly underneath, like floorboards in the home of someone too cheap to fix anything. The first guard drew his sword, its edge glinting in the torchlight. He swung. The White Walker swung back. The sword shattered like a wafer cracker. That was the moment they all realized legends are only legends because people refuse to believe old news. The massacre happened fast as Cersei lying without preparation, reasoning, or shame. The patrol was wiped out in moments. Only one man survived, sprinting for his life while praying his legs wouldn't betray him. He wasn't running out of bravery, he was running because he followed. The eternal philosophy of everyone with a functioning brain. See a demon? Run. Why would you stand still? Wind howled, the forest darkened, and the guard dashed past tree after tree as if Mother Nature herself were yelling, "Run, my child, don't try to be a hero." He burst out of the woods, ran across the snow, ran all the way to Winterfell. Breathless, he spilled everything. White Walkers, ice zombies, grotesque deaths, terror beyond reason. He hoped someone would believe him, but he forgot where he was. Westeros. And in Westeros, truth, law. A lord's honor. Ned Stark stood before him, handsome, cold, righteous, looking like he'd been divinely assigned to teach humans how to behave. Unfortunately, righteous in Westeros is just another word for dies early. Ned asked a few questions and listened. The guard saw a glimmer of hope, but hope in the North is like fire, goes out before it can even apologize. Ned Stark declared, "You abandoned the Night's Watch." The guard thought, because there were demons. Ned thought, rules are rules. The audience thought, well, he's dead. And so the head rolled, clean, solemn, classic Stark style, straight, icy, no nonsense. The darkly comedic part? This was the one rare moment in his life where a Night's Watch guard told the truth 100%. And the reward was decapitation. If Westeros had a sport called telling the truth but still losing to liars, he'd win the championship. The beheading scene took place on the snowfield, tragic, cold, and unfair enough to make viewers beg the author to please reconsider logic. But no, this is Game of Thrones. Logic here is rarer than justice. His death changed nothing. The living didn't believe, the dead couldn't speak, and the White Walkers, the real threat, were preparing to return like a frozen nightmare. The North remained silent, but not the peaceful kind of silence. It was the silence of nature quietly watching humans destroy themselves. And in that cold, our story begins, beginning with a head rolling on snow, a truth buried, and a world too numb to care, setting the stage for tragedies that would stretch across thousands of pages. In the distance, wolves howled. No one knew who they were calling. Maybe people, maybe death, or maybe winter itself, the uninvited guest already striding back home. After that head rolling on the snow, the one soaked in northern law triumphs absolutely over cold hard truth. We follow Ned Stark back to Winterfell. Winterfell is known as the home of honor, discipline, and decisions that will make future generations sigh very loudly. Snow keeps falling, wolves keep howling, and the entire land gives off the aura of a family clearly destined to be the universe's favorite guinea pigs whenever chaos is nearby. Winterfell appears like a fortress carved straight out of gray stone, cold but beautiful. The kind of ancient beauty where, if someone told you it's fun, here, they are definitely lying. Inside, the Starks live as if the world depends entirely on their seriousness. From Ned, Catelyn, down to the children, everyone carries their own special brand of sadness, their own type of heaviness, and a future that nobody knows but everyone can bet will not be bright and cheerful. First is Ned, a man whose face looks like the gods forged it out of granite. His catchphrase is, "Winter is coming." No one is sure whether he says it to scare the kids, warn the world, or remind everyone to save firewood. But he says it so often that even the castle walls probably know it by heart. Ned lives serious, thinks serious, speaks serious, and especially judges serious. He is the kind of man who, when you make a mistake, will not shout at you. He will simply look at you with a disappointed expression that says, "I am sad, but I will still behead you properly, according to the law." Catelyn, his wife, carries the energy of a woman who loves her husband, loves her children, and absolutely does not love Jon Snow. Every time Jon appears, her eyes basically say, "The world is huge, yet you had to end up here. What a pity." She never says it aloud, but her subtle chill is strong enough that people instinctively avoid family conversations when she is around. The Stark kids are as numerous as a crowded tavern during rush hour. Robb, the eldest, handsome, kind, and destined to prove that handsome men in this world never have good fates. Sansa, the dreamy one, believing life is a fairy tale. She looks at Joffrey and sees a rosy future, while the audience sees red. Arya is the complete opposite, loves swords, hates sewing, and champions the philosophy, "Every house needs a rule breaker, and I volunteer." Bran loves climbing, a hobby the universe will gently confiscate later by pushing him off a tower. Little Rickon shows up like a cute background prop, never gets the chance to contribute anything before disappearing in a later season, but we will get to that. And finally, Jon Snow, the child who is treated like family but also very clearly not family, loved in a "I care, but let us not talk about your mother" kind of way. Just as the family leaves Winterfell after the execution, they stumble upon something strange. A dead direwolf, enormous and majestic, the symbol of House Stark, lying in the snow. Beside it is a litter of 6 pups, still pink and helpless. People of the North believe nothing happens without meaning. And indeed, this one carries so much meaning that they all exchange looks like, "Oh yes, this is absolutely a sign for a drama arc that will last many seasons." Ned intends to kill the pups because they will be trouble and hard to raise. But Jon Snow, with his survival-focused thinking, says the one sentence that makes everyone pause. There are 6 pups and 6 Stark children. A line that is logical, mystical, and deep enough to make Ned think for 1.5 seconds, longer than his execution decision time. And so each child gets a direwolf. Robb carries Grey Wind, noble and strong. Sansa cradles Lady, the most well-behaved wolf in Westeros. Arya grabs Nymeria, sharp as her owner. Bran gets Summer, gentle and calm. Rickon receives Shaggy Dog, a walking embodiment of chaotic energy. And Jon, the child nobody wants to talk about, finds Ghost, white as snow, red-eyed, silent just like his owner. The sight of each child holding a wolf pup feels like a destined ceremony. But from a sarcastic angle, the Starks look like a big family in a pet shop where every kid demands a puppy and the father just gives up. Still, the audience knows. These wolves will not just grow up. They will become symbols, living prophecies, and sometimes save their humans in ways even the author probably did not expect. When the family returns to Winterfell, the atmosphere seems warm, but only temporarily. Because we, the viewers, know they are standing in a play where every character's fate will soon be flipped upside down like a chessboard thrown across a room. Far away, a wolf howls. No one knows whether it calls fate, warns of what is coming, or simply sighs at a good-hearted family and thinks, yes, you are going to suffer a lot. But the moment itself is beautiful. A rare moment where all the Starks are together, smiling, holding their wolves, still believing the world is all right. If they knew what awaited them, war, loss, betrayal, dragons, undead, they might hug their wolves tighter. But they do not know. And that innocence makes this picture strangely sad and strangely beautiful. From the top of Winterfell's ramparts, people could see the royal entourage approaching like a parade that was both noisy and extremely expensive for taxpayers. On the snow-covered road, the golden stag banners of House Baratheon fluttered wildly, and the lion of House Lannister marched alongside, as if whispering, "The court currently has only two kinds of people, those who owe the Lannisters and those who are about to owe the Lannisters." The wind blew harder, making the banners snap loudly, as though they were trying to shout, "Brace yourselves, drama is arriving." When the procession halted at the gates, the first to appear was not King Robert, but the little Prince Joffrey, gazing at the world with the eyes of a child convinced that everyone must adore him, which is unfortunate because the audience knows absolutely no one does. Behind Joffrey was Jaime Lannister, handsome enough that if you did not know he was dangerous, you would think he was auditioning for the role of a hero in another show. Cersei sat in her carriage, her face proud and cold, the kind of person whose mere breathing smells faintly of plots. But the highlight of the entourage was not the royal family. It was the small man hopping down from the carriage with a confident gait, Tyrion Lannister, known to the world as the Dwarf, yet possessing a mind sharper than the entire royal council combined. Tyrion appeared with the sort of energy that said, "I may be short, but my intelligence is twice my height." He looked at Winterfell the way a traveler looks at a 3-star hotel, mildly interesting, slightly doubtful, but acceptable for drinking. No sooner had he stepped down than he yawned, not from exhaustion, but from enduring a long journey with Joffrey, which was more tiring than climbing the wall with bare hands. Finally, Robert emerged, large, heavy, slightly drunk, and smelling of ale as though he had consumed the share of the entire entourage. But when he saw Ned, his eyes lit up like two best friends reunited after years apart, an honest brightness that had nothing in common with the calculating glint of courtiers. "Ned!" Robert roared, not caring that his voice echoed across 3 neighboring districts. The two men embraced in the northern way, though the moment was interrupted by the rumbling of Robert's stomach, making the reunion touching but tinged with the scent of stale ale. Robert did not bother with formalities. The moment they entered the great hall, he placed a heavy hand on Ned's shoulder. So heavy, Ned would probably feel the soreness for hours, but he endured it because of friendship. Robert declared plainly, "I want you to be my hand." His tone was solemn, though the ale in his breath made the words wobble. Ned's face froze over like the lake behind the castle. The title of Hand of the King sounded grand, powerful, and prestigious, but its mortality rate was nearly the highest in the 7 kingdoms. In Westeros, becoming the king's hand was the equivalent of accepting the lead role in a Greek tragedy, impressive, glorious, and guaranteed to end badly. Robert laughed loudly, completely unaware he had just handed his best friend a direct ticket to a political morgue. "You are the only one I trust," he said. It sounded touching. But if Tyrion had been standing beside them, he would have taken a sip of wine and whispered, "A sentence that can make a man happier than being gifted land, but can also terrify him more than seeing a White Walker." Tyrion would think that because in his mind, every sentence is analyzed with logic as sharp as Valyrian steel. While Robert continued talking grand plans, Tyrion stood behind him, pouring wine, drinking wine, and observing everything with the eyes of someone who understood perfectly. Power is a dangerous game, and the Starks play with too much honesty. He wondered whether Ned realized that the chair of the king's hand was not a seat at all, but a catapult that launched its occupant straight into the political graveyard. But Tyrion said nothing. Sometimes, telling the truth at the wrong time was as dangerous as running barefoot into a forest filled with White Walkers. And Sansa, oh Sansa, saw Joffrey and her eyes sparkled like night stars. She dreamed of weddings, princes, and a royal life. Sweet as pastries, completely unaware that beneath Joffrey's silk clothing was a soul that had no soul. Cersei watched this and smiled softly, the kind of smile that said, "Yes, good. Fall in love with my son, child. The more attached you are, the easier it is for me to use you as a political pawn." Arya stood farther away, looking at Joffrey as one looks at a pastry that fell onto the dirt. Everyone claims it is delicious, but she alone sees the mold. At the feast, Tyrion drank so much wine that people suspected he had a permanent wine tube connected from barrel to mouth. But whether drunk or sober, he observed everything. Tyrion knew each person in the room carried a secret. Ned carried the grief of losing Jon Arryn. Robert carried the pain of losing Lyanna. Cersei carried the ambition of her family. Jaime carried an ego that smelled of gold. And Tyrion carried the truth that he was the only Lannister whose brain functioned consistently. After the feast, when everyone retired, Tyrion walked along the battlements and drew a deep breath of the cold northern air. He thought, the north is cold, but at least it's honest. Not like King's Landing, where betrayal is hotter than red wine. And he smiled, because he enjoyed observing places like this, places where people believed themselves safe, while standing right next to the cliff of destiny. The next morning, Ned was still struggling with whether he should travel south. Robert ate breakfast while talking about boar hunting, wine, and politics as though the three topics were naturally related. Catelyn watched her husband with anxious eyes, sensing that going south meant entering a place where no one lived long. Ned's children were still innocent, unaware that every step their father took might open the door to a storm. Tyrion stood in a corner, lifted another cup of wine, and said a line that would make everyone pale if they heard it. In this life, monsters are few, fools are many, and it is the many fools who are truly dangerous. While Ned Stark at Winterfell was still torn between duty to his best friend and basic survival instincts, across the narrow sea, another story was unfolding, louder, more colorful, and especially more delusional than an entire library dedicated to hallucinations. It was the story of the last two Targaryen siblings, Viserys and Daenerys, the remaining fragments of a dynasty that once rode dragons, now living off merchant charity and their own self-delusion. Across the sea, the weather was much warmer than Winterfell, yet their lives were colder than being written out of the historical narrative. 20 years in exile had eroded everything, except Viserys' ego. He spent his youth clinging to one belief: I am the rightful king of the 7 kingdoms. And the tragic part was that he repeated it so often he believed it more than he believed in actual geography. This turned him into a strange creature. No power, no army, no money, no territory, yet a sense of self-importance larger than the Valyrian Empire at its peak. Viserys treated his sister like collateral. To him, Dany was not a person. She was a premium exchange item, like a one-time discount voucher for King's Landing. Daenerys, soft-spoken and distant, walked through life with the unclear fear of someone who has never understood why the world treats her like merchandise. She was gentle, quiet, and lived in a foreign land with the constant dread of a brother who had only 2 moods, anger and delusion. Viserys married her off to Khal Drogo, a man built like a mountain and as talkative as a boulder. Drogo was not someone who enjoyed philosophical discussions. He liked riding horses, fighting, and looking at life with the silent confidence of someone who knows he is strong and has nothing to prove. For Viserys, Drogo was the doorway to a crown. For Dany, Drogo was a destiny she never had the chance to refuse. The wedding took place in the midst of Dothraki drums, shouting, roasted meat, and infinite rounds of fight each other and laugh afterward, which the Dothraki considered blessings. Meanwhile, Viserys grinned like a man who believed he had just unlocked a treasure vault, except the vault did not exist. Khal Drogo gifted Dany 3 fossilized dragon eggs, a present everyone assumed was purely ornamental, except for anyone who had seen the end of the series. At that moment, Daenerys had no idea these eggs would reshape the world. She only knew they were beautiful and cold, much like her life. When the Dothraki finished the wedding, they immediately mounted their horses and continued on, as if they did not distinguish a wedding from a sporting event. Viserys followed the caravan like a rooster, convinced he was a phoenix. Every step he took, he reminded Dany, "One day you will be a queen." And the audience knew he was right, but not because of him. In truth, Viserys was similar to the White Walkers in the north, seemingly frightening, but destined to disappear quickly. In her new life, Daenerys slowly changed. She rode horses, learned a new language, and most importantly, learned to fear her brother less. Ironically, it was life among the fiercely independent Dothraki that taught her she possessed a strength she had never dared to claim. Her gaze softened, yet deepened. Her voice remained quiet, but became clear. Drogo looked at her the way someone looks at a flower blooming from stone, rare, beautiful, and strange. Viserys changed in the opposite direction. He grew more unhinged by the day, terrified of losing control over his sister. He raged, cursed, demanded. Each time he erupted, the entire Dothraki horde looked at him the way one might look at a small angry dog barking at a wooden post. To them, Viserys was the only thing weaker than the weather. One day, Viserys dared lift a sword to Daenerys' belly right in front of Drogo, demanding an army. The Dothraki stared at him with a mix of mockery and pity. In that moment, his fate was sealed. A golden crown, in the most literal sense, and as hot as bathing in metal at 1,000 degrees. Viserys collapsed, dying with the expression of a man who finally realized his lifelong fantasy had never touched reality. A death tragic, sarcastic, and perfectly deserved. But Daenerys did not cry. She watched as if a door had closed and another had opened. She was the last Targaryen, holding 3 dragon eggs, and most importantly, she had begun to believe in herself. From that moment on, the story across the sea was no longer about Viserys, the man who proved noble blood cannot save anyone from idiocy. It became Daenerys' story, the desert flower, who would stand taller and eventually rise with 3 dragons the world believed extinct. While Winterfell prepared for winter, while Ned considered Robert's offer, while the Lannisters prepared their traps across the sea, a small spark was growing. A spark no one knew would become a storm. One day, that spark would cross the sea. One day, the dragons would hatch. And Westeros, a land busy arguing daily, would learn that their problem was not only the Iron Throne, it was 3 dragons with a mistress who knew exactly what she was doing. While Daenerys across the sea was slowly rediscovering herself, and Ned at Winterfell was still sitting in front of the hearth debating whether to become the king's hand, a job with a mortality rate higher than dragon handling, young Bran Stark was about to change the history of Westeros in the most unexpected way. By climbing a tall tower, simply to prove that gravity, even in a fantasy world, is always working very hard. Bran loved climbing. Everyone knew it. Arya knew. Robb knew. Rickon knew, even though he was still small. The entire castle knew. Even the walls of Winterfell knew, because they had been worn smooth from Bran touching them too often. If Bran had lived in the modern world, he would have become a parkour athlete. Unfortunately, Bran lived in Westeros, a place where parkour brought no fame, only accidents. That day the weather was so beautiful that even the North seemed to admit, "Fine, sometimes I can be gentle." Bran climbed the old tower with the agility of a hyperactive little squirrel. He climbed because he was curious, because he liked it, and because he was the only child in the castle who believed higher means seeing more. What he did not know was that sometimes seeing too much means seeing things one should never see. On top of the tower, Bran heard voices, and like any healthy, curious 10-year-old boy, he moved closer, closer still. Then looked straight into a scene no sleep psychologist would ever recommend for children under 18. Jaime Lannister and Cersei Lannister in a very private family yoga position. Westeros held many secrets, but this was the biggest of them all. The Lannister twins loved each other in the most absolute sense. Bran's eyes widened. Jaime's and Cersei's eyes widened. The tension was sharp as a bowstring. In those 3 silent seconds, one could hear the wind, Bran's heartbeat, and Jaime's logic whispering, "Well, we are finished." Cersei froze. Jaime tensed. Bran stood there thinking, did I just open the wrong door at the worst possible moment in the world? In a fairy tale, this might be the moment where the adults explain gently, threaten a little, and let the child forget. But this was Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones did not do gentle. It preferred definitive solutions. Jaime looked at Bran, looked at Cersei, looked at Bran again, looked at Cersei again, then sighed, like a man who knew his last good deed had been done long ago. And then came the iconic line, "The things I do for love," and Jaime pushed Bran out the window. He pushed very lightly, politely even, but with an effectiveness unmatched by any martial arts kick. Bran fell. He fell steadily, straight, and cinematically. This was the moment Westeros officially veered onto a different path. If Bran had simply slipped, the story might have been easier to bear. But being pushed by a Lannister in the name of family damage control turned the fall into a dark chapter, a buried secret beneath every scheme in Season 1. Bran dropped like a leaf, if that leaf weighed 30 kilos and fell from the 5th floor. He plunged into absolute silence. The wind roared past his ears. Then came the cold impact with the ground. Everything went black as obsidian. Winterfell trembled. Catelyn ran like someone possessed. Ned saw his unmoving son and felt his heart tighten. Robb shook in confusion. Arya, the fearless one, grew quieter than ever. Jon Snow stood at a distance, afraid to get close, knowing his place in the family was that of a silent shadow. Bran lay unconscious, not dead, but in a deep sleep. And that was when the drama began to rise like a great tide. Whether the boy woke or not, all of Westeros would change. And Cersei, with a face of marble and a heart just as hard, understood everything now hung on the thinnest thread. But the story was not finished. While Bran lay unconscious, a hired assassin sneaked into the room carrying a Valyrian steel dagger with a hilt of carved deer bone, a weapon no one used to kill children unless they were very rich or very foolish, or had a patron who was both very rich and very foolish. He tried to end the boy, to protect the secret. But Bran's wolf pup, Summer, leapt in and dealt with the intruder as neatly as clearing a plate. One bite, one pull, finished. No need for elite squads, no need for knights in shining armor. Just a 6-month-old direwolf with a stronger sense of justice than half the lords in Westeros. Catelyn looked at the dagger and understood. Bran did not fall. Bran was pushed, and someone had just paid for a killer to clean up the mess. In this world, when something bad happened, people did not ask why. They asked, which Lannister did it? Bran remained still, drifting in deep sleep, a sleep that in such a dark world was sometimes safer than waking. But that sleep brought strange dreams, a white wolf, a weirwood, a 3-eyed raven. Anyone who understood psychological symbolism would know these dreams were not normal at all, but the beginning of a connection to something far beyond reality. For now, though, Bran was simply a child pushed from a tower, a victim of forbidden love, a pivot of fate, and a warning to the audience that, in Game of Thrones, children are not protected by plot armor for minors. Anyone can be thrown from a tower, in both the literal and symbolic sense. Winter is coming, and Bran's fall was only the greeting. While Bran lay motionless and Winterfell trembled under the weight of worry, Jon Snow stepped onto his own path, a path he believed would lead to glory, honor, and a shining place in history. Unfortunately, he would soon learn that joining the Night's Watch was nothing like joining a noble order of legendary knights. It was more like signing up for lifelong military service with no discharge date, no leave, and a higher chance of dying than winning the lottery. Jon Snow left Winterfell with a tangled heart, sorrow for Bran's fall, sorrow for never truly belonging in the family, sorrow for loving much and receiving little. But at least he had Ghost beside him, a white wolf who moved like a silent shadow with an IQ noticeably higher than his owner's. Benjen Stark, Jon's uncle, led him toward the wall. The snow grew thicker, the wind harsher, and the air cold enough to rival Cersei's glare on a bad day. Jon believed the Night's Watch was a place where honor belonged to the noble. He imagined he would join an elite force, don a black cloak with pride, and stand atop the wall watching the north like a guardian of light. Unfortunately, that was a dream. And that dream shattered the moment he stepped into Castle Black. Seeing the wall for the first time, Jon's jaw dropped. It was massive, white and towering, tall enough to crush the dreams of any short man, especially Tyrion. The wall loomed, ancient and freezing, breathing out cold like a sleeping ice beast thousands of years old. Jon felt awe. Ghost felt nothing. Benjen stayed silent, likely thinking, "Give it a few weeks, boy. You'll regret admiring it so quickly." The moment Jon entered Castle Black, he discovered that the Night's Watch was not a noble brotherhood of heroic knights. It was a gathering place for society's leftovers, thieves, cutthroats, runaways, and men the world had labeled unnecessary. This place was like a rehabilitation camp where everyone wore black just to match. Tyrion Lannister, visiting Castle Black purely because life was too dull, took one look around with half an eye and full sarcasm. "This is the wall that protects the world. I thought it was meant to keep people from escaping their disappointment below." He delighted in drinking and mocking others, especially Jon, a young man who was serious, proud, honorable, and emotionally vulnerable in a place built to crush all four of those qualities. Jon trained with the new recruits. He was strong, skilled with a sword, and quickly stood out. But instead of earning respect, he earned resentment. At Castle Black, talent did not help you survive. Modesty did. And Jon, sweet, earnest, slightly proud, thanks to Stark upbringing, had yet to learn that. Tyrion watched from the sidelines, sipping wine like a man attending a comedy show. This Stark boy clearly has never been slapped by life before. The recruits were not evil. They were simply bitter, bitter at life, bitter at society, and most bitter of all at being compared to a boy who radiated moral superiority. But gradually, Jon learned humility. He realized everyone here had been pushed to the edge of life. And when you stand in a room full of men with criminal pasts, the smartest thing to do is lower your voice, your sword, and your ego. The Master-at-Arms, Sir Alliser Thorne, was famous across Westeros not for skill in battle but for his unmatched ability to provoke irritation. His skin was thin as glass, but his voice sharp as steel. He looked at Jon and said, "Snow, your head is held higher than your place here." Jon stayed silent. Tyrion clapped softly from the corner, like someone who had just witnessed quality dark humor. The more time Jon spent at the wall, the more he realized the Night's Watch was nothing like the stories. It was poor, dim, cold. The food was terrible. The armor was torn. The morale was like marble dropped on stone, cracked and ready to shatter. The only thing the Watch had in abundance was a faint hope that humanity still needed them. A faint hope many had long forgotten. Tyrion continued observing Jon and occasionally dropped lines like, "If you're the smartest one here, I fear for the future of all of you." But Tyrion did more than mock. He understood Jon. He saw the pain of a boy who belonged nowhere. And Tyrion, a rich dwarf constantly dismissed, knew that feeling better than anyone. One day, Jon and Tyrion climbed to the top of the wall. The wind sliced skin. The sky stretched endlessly. The ice shone blue like the eyes of a white walker. Jon stared in awe. Tyrion stared in misery, thinking, "Who built this thing? Truly someone with too much time." Tyrion said, "Do not forget your true position, Jon Snow. You are an outsider in both places, in the Stark home and here. but you have a mind. Use it." It sounded like sarcasm, but it was the kindest advice Jon would ever receive. While Jon struggled to accept the harsh reality of his new life, Castle Black received terrible news from the north. A group of men had gone missing, and at the same time, Benjen Stark, the one person Jon felt was true family, rode out on patrol and vanished. No call, no trace, leaving Jon with a sharp emptiness that felt like a blade. The Night's Watch, already weak, now revealed its true state. They were not strong enough to stand against anything bigger than a strong breeze. Stories of White Walkers, once just tales children used to scare each other, began creeping back into uneasy dreams. The air felt heavy, as though the wall itself held a secret struggling to break free. Jon had not joined a noble order. He had joined a group waiting for disaster. He did not know it yet, but the audience knew. The Night's Watch would not fall because of the enemy outside. It would fall because the world below was too busy fighting itself, and the true enemy did not like waiting. Jon Snow was busy sparring with criminals on top of the wall, while Winterfell stayed home worrying about Bran's fate. Meanwhile, Ned Stark, having just arrived in King's Landing, the most dazzling capital in Westeros, quickly realized the city was beautiful in the way a gold-painted box of rotten fish is beautiful. White walls, flying banners, splendid castles, but stepping into politics here was like sticking your hand into a nest of fire ants. Only difference, the ants here wore velvet, sprayed perfume, and smiled politely while stabbing each other in the back. Ned attended his first meeting of the small council, the opening session of his new job as the King's Hand. The title sounded as grand as Vice Ruler of the Known World, but in practice it meant the guy responsible for cleaning up the king's mistakes and unpaid bills. The moment he entered the room, he saw a complete collection of people guaranteed to give any newcomer a migraine. Varys, the eunuch who knew every secret in the realm, soft-spoken but as dangerous as a water snake. Peter Baelish, Littlefinger, master of coin, master of brothels, master of trapping people like fish in a net. Renly, King Robert's handsome younger brother, who mostly spoke for fun. Anne Pycelle, the elderly sage whose wisdom came with an impressive ability to fall asleep mid-conversation. Ned sat down, expecting to hear matters of state, but within minutes he realized the kingdom was bankrupt. Truly bankrupt. Not, we're a bit short this month, but the kind of debt where if Westeros had banks, the capital would have been repossessed years ago. 3 million gold dragons owed to the Lannisters, a number that made Ned glance around the room, wondering when the Stark family would start receiving calls from debt collectors. Littlefinger smiled brightly and snapped his fingers. "My Lord Hand, King's Landing runs on debt. We owe the Iron Bank, we owe merchants, we owe the Lannisters. But don't worry, as long as you're alive, the debt isn't a problem." Ned thought, so the debt becomes a problem only after I die? Wonderful. Ned then began exploring the political maze of King's Landing. Walking down the hallway, he could hear 1,000 whispers. This person slandering that person spying on someone else. Varys emerged from a shadow like a talking cat and murmured, "You and I both want peace for the realm," Ned thought. "Your definition of peace probably means everyone obeys you." Littlefinger approached with honeyed venom in his voice. "Ned, trust no one here, not even me, but trust me a little." Ned felt he'd just heard a piece of nonsense philosophy that somehow made sense. One look into Littlefinger's eyes told him this was the kind of man you give money to, and 1 second later, the money disappears, 7 seconds later, you disappear, and 30 seconds later, the entire story is rewritten in his favor. Meanwhile, Ned investigated the death of Jon Arryn, the Hand before him. A smart, careful man who died suddenly and suspiciously. Ned questioned Pycelle. The old man twisted his back like an ancient turtle and spoke at the speed of a dying snail. Jon Arryn, sadly, had a fever and passed. Ned wanted to shake him and shout, "Could you talk faster?" The more Ned listened, the more he sensed a familiar smell, the smell of Lannister involvement. It usually came packaged with gold, political power, and the occasional mysterious corpse. Cersei and Jaime drifted through the castle hallways like two arrogant panthers prowling a stone jungle. Jaime delivered one of the most iconic taunts. "I hear you've come to help stabilize the realm. Good luck. No one's managed that since I've been here." Cersei only needed a single glance to remind Ned that in King's Landing, beautiful women were often sharper than daggers. Ned informed King Robert that Bran had awakened. Robert was thrilled for about 3 seconds, then returned to drinking and planning a grand tournament, a massively expensive one. Ned nearly choked. "We are in debt and you want a jousting festival?" Robert roared with laughter. "I'm the king. If a king doesn't enjoy himself, who will?" Ned began questioning when he signed up to be a babysitter for a very large middle-aged child. While Ned drowned in political chaos, another drama erupted. A disguised argument between Sansa and Arya, sparking the underlying tension between House Stark and House Lannister. Sansa floated between romantic dreams of Prince Joffrey, while Arya increasingly despised this golden city. Ned realized his daughters were being pulled into the capital's games, even though neither could yet spell the word intrigue. Ned sent his men to search for clues about Jon Arryn's death. Every lead pointed to something odd. Arryn and Stannis Baratheon had been studying noble family histories together. 2 grown men reading genealogy books as a team. Something was very wrong. But Ned understood. This was a crucial clue. Too bad Stannis had left the capital like an offended uncle, flipping over a game board. His reasons remained as mysterious as his perpetual scowl. Ned made even more enemies when he blocked King Robert's plan to assassinate Daenerys Targaryen, a pregnant girl living on the other side of the world, minding her own business. But for these courtiers, smashing dragon eggs from afar seemed perfectly reasonable. Ned opposed it. Robert slammed the table. The true nature of court politics was revealed. The more right you are, the more dangerous you become. The longer Ned stayed, the more he saw King's Landing for what it really was, a battlefield without swords. Everyone smiled, spoke sweetly, offered wine, and on the second sentence tried to set a trap. Cersei spoke like she was reading lines from a tragedy. Varys drifted like a polite ghost. Littlefinger moved like a traveling salesman selling poisonous advice. Ned Stark, a man of honor who liked things simple and clear, was now lost in a world where truth and lies blended like cheap wine mixed with water. And here, there was only one law. Whoever was clever survived longer. He did not yet know that every thread around him was tightening, and that the political web of King's Landing, where sunlight glittered on golden rooftops, was actually a trap being woven to swallow him whole. After Ned Stark realized that King's Landing was a place where the phrase, "everything will be fine," had never existed in recorded history, another story unfolded on the outskirts of the city. A story seemingly tiny, yet actually the first domino that would topple into dozens of wars. And its main character, of course, was Prince Joffrey, the living embodiment of the saying, "Don't judge a person by their cloak. Sometimes the cloak is the only smart thing about them." The sky that day was bright, sunlight spilling over a quiet forest near the riverbank. Arya Stark was playing with her friend Micah, a gentle butcher's boy who harmed no one except the occasional piece of meat. They swung wooden swords at each other, shouting, "Valar Morghulis," with the childish certainty that it made them look cool. Arya laughed loudly, hair messy, eyes sparkling. A rare moment of peace in a city filled with poisonous politics. And then, that peace ended when Joffrey Baratheon arrived on horseback like a gust of toxic wind arriving right on schedule. The prince dismounted, sunlight gleaming off his fine clothes, making him look far more impressive than his actual skill set warranted. Joffrey always had the face of someone who had never heard the word no, the eyes of a boy convinced he was the center of the universe, and the attitude of someone who believed every living creature should kneel before him, even the squirrels. Joffrey approached Arya, smiling the kind of smile that said, "I'm about to do something awful, and I think it's hilarious." He saw Micah holding a wooden sword and scoffed, "A sword? Letting you touch a real sword would be an insult to the blade." Then he unsheathed his actual steel sword and swung it around. It looked impressive only to people who didn't understand swordsmanship. Anyone who did immediately knew he was flailing around to look threatening. Joffrey asked Micah, "Who are you?" Micah stammered, "I'm a butcher's boy." Joffrey nodded with the air of a philosopher hearing an amusing story. "A butcher's boy. You handle meat, so you think you can handle a sword. Let me show you what a real sword feels like." And he slashed Micah. Not to kill, he was too much of a coward for that. He wanted to hurt first. Blood welled up. Micah cried out. Arya shouted for him to stop. Joffrey laughed. Exactly the kind of laugh a cruel child makes when he thinks hurting others is a noble pastime. Arya leapt forward. Micah fled in terror, and Joffrey smirked as he sneered, "Run along, little peasant." Then he puffed himself up like a rooster that had just won a fight. It started. Arya refused to let him gloat. She struck him with her wooden sword. It didn't hurt him, but it dented something far more fragile, his ego. And Joffrey's ego was bigger than King's Landing. The prince screamed, "You little wretch, how dare you!" Arya yelled back, "You're a monster!" Joffrey raised his steel sword to strike back, fully intending to cut down a 12-year-old girl, a true display of royal quality. Then Nymeria, Arya's direwolf, burst out like a streak of lightning. The wolf lunged at Joffrey, biting his arm. To be fair, it was a light bite, a warning. But Joffrey collapsed as if a dragon had breathed fire on him. He screamed as though the Dothraki had ridden straight through him, though the wound was minor. Minor enough that he could later embellish it into myth. Joffrey cried, wailed, and rolled on the ground. He accused Arya. He accused Micah. He accused the entire world, but he never accused himself. Arya was caught, but before that she led Nymeria into the woods, knowing the wolf would be killed if found. She forced Nymeria to run. Tears streamed down her face as her heart twisted. Nymeria, who understood her better than many humans understood themselves, ran. A separation so painful that even viewers felt the loss. Arya was brought back. Joffrey's tiny wound, barely the size of a fingernail, was bandaged, but he retold the story as if the wolf had nearly eaten his arm off. Sansa stood between two worlds. On one side, her sister, on the other, the handsome prince, in her eyes at least. King Robert wanted to drink and be done with the whole affair, but Cersei would not let it go. Her gaze cut through the air like a blade. She declared, "No, wolf, no problem." Joffrey nodded, though his eyes were still a little watery, the kind of water he produced when a mother saves your dignity for you. Arya spoke. Sansa spoke, but Sansa softened details, half lying out of fear of upsetting the Archie. Prince. Ned Stark saw his older daughter, then Arya, quiet, gentle disappointment clouding his face. Joffrey stood tall like a warrior who had won a great battle. Amazing how the guilty one was also the closest to the king. Robert sighed, wanting the drama to end, but Cersei refused. She demanded punishment, and the one punished wasn't the guilty one, not Joffrey, not Micah, not Arya. The punished one was Lady, Sansa's direwolf. Why? Nymeria is gone. Take Lady instead. A logic that could only be born in Cersei's mind, a woman who believed justice was as flexible as ribbon. Robert didn't want it. Ned was gutted, but Cersei had decided, and Robert, once again, yielded. Ned carried out the deed himself, knowing that if he left it to the Lannister soldiers, Lady would suffer. He stroked Lady's fur, looked into her gentle eyes. Then he did one of the saddest things of his life. The hammer fell. The wolf's voice fell silent, and Sansa cried the whole night. Micah, meanwhile, was hunted down by Lannister men and killed, a child, innocent, running from a prince's cruelty, only to die because the story required it. In Westeros, children were not protected. Children, wolves, and good people died equally easily. That was the unspoken rule. Joffrey watched Sansa cry from a distance. He smiled faintly, a small smile, like a crack forming in a nightmare, a smile that said more than any line of dialogue. I got away with this, and I will get away with much more. This was the moment the golden-haired prince revealed his true face. Not royal radiance, but a petty, cruel soul wrapped in silk and entitlement. Bran had fallen from the tower, Jon had discovered the Night's Watch was hell, Ned was sinking into political traps, and now a wolf was killed because a petty prince lied. Westeros was shifting, not because of dragons, not because of White Walkers, but because a spoiled child had been given far too much power. That night, the misty forest road looked like the perfect place for a sleepy traveler on horseback. But Westeros is never that kind. It enjoys throwing trouble at people in ways that are almost artistic. Catelyn Stark, a woman who only ever wanted to live peacefully in Winterfell, now sat in a roadside inn with her heart pounding faster than a war drum. Not because of the strong ale, and certainly not because of the scenery, but because a certain dwarf with a mind far too sharp for society's comfort had just walked in. Tyrion Lannister entered the inn like a man used to being misunderstood by the entire world, yet still determined to enjoy life in his own style. His small frame looked easy to overlook, but his eyes were sharp enough to peel the secrets off every corner of the room in a few breaths. Everyone else was busy minding their own whispers. Only Catelyn watched him the way someone might watch a loose thread on history, ready to pull and unravel an entire chapter. And then came the peak of Westerosi irony. The man nobody expected suddenly became the center of the universe because of a knife, a beautiful knife, a costly knife, a very sharp knife, most importantly, a knife designed for starting wars. Catelyn rose, her voice calm but carrying the energy of someone about to break world peace. She turned to the gathered lords, men she had once hosted or men indebted to House Stark, and with just a few sentences, she transformed them from customers into a personal arrest squad. It was such a fast shift from audience to accomplices that even Tyrion raised an eyebrow. "You know me, you know my house, and this man," she nodded at Tyrion, "tried to murder my son." A charge heavier than a Lannister gold vault, spoken with absolute certainty. Who would dare argue? In Westeros, strong emotion often beats strong logic. Tyrion understood that better than anyone. He merely sighed, like a man dragged into a terrible play he never auditioned for. Swords flashed, the men surrounded him. Tyrion, perfectly unruffled, shrugged. "I suppose I deserve at least a proper greeting." But no greeting came, only shackles and an escort out the door like an unwilling tourist. The journey to the Eyrie, the mountaintop fortress ruled by Catelyn's sister Lysa Arryn, was a perfect example of the saying, "The road to justice in Westeros is never paved with reason. It's paved with emotion, suspicion, and a sprinkle of madness." Catelyn believed she was doing the right thing. Tyrion knew all too well that in Westeros, right tends to die first. And in this moment, convenience sided with House Lannister. The mountain paths were treacherous, horses exhausted, guards complaining. Only Tyrion found moments to grin, quietly amused. He was not the type of man to let himself be used as a disposable pawn. Along the way, he told crude jokes, dropped witty remarks, and sprinkled philosophical gems from his short-body, big-brain collection, enough to make even the guards laugh. Catelyn watched him with a mix of surprise and irritation, perhaps realizing that the prisoner she dragged along wasn't nearly as foolish as his stature suggested. "Why would I want to kill your son?" Tyrion asked gently. "I only kill those who might kill me back." A line both funny and frighteningly logical, a rare thing in this world powered by spontaneous emotion. When they arrived at the Eyrie, with its infamous sky cells, prison chambers that opened directly onto a cliff, designed to hold inmates with pure fear, Tyrion truly understood that his fate was now in the hands of deeply emotional people. Lysa Arryn, paranoid and obsessed with protecting her child, needed no proof. Feeling was enough. Tyrion was thrown into a slanted cell with a slick floor, cold wind slicing through. "A very purposeful interior design," he muttered, shivering from cold and from the absurdity of it all. But Westeros sometimes determines justice not through law, nor truth, but through trial by combat. Tyrion, sharp as a fox who memorized the legal code, wasted no time requesting one. A sophisticated way of saying, whichever side's fighter wins, that side is right. Bran appeared, Tyrion's salvation in human form, efficient, cold, practical, never wasting a strike. When Bran won, Catelyn had no choice but to release Tyrion. No apology, no compensation, just a lingering sense that the game of power had officially cracked open. Tyrion walked down the mountain, clothing torn but chin lifted high. "I told you," he said. "I'm innocent, at least in this matter." His victory wasn't just a dwarf escaping death. It was the first explosion in the coming war between Stark and Lannister. Catelyn believed she was protecting her family, but she was unknowingly pushing the entire realm toward chaos with no exit. And more importantly, House Lannister now had a perfectly legitimate reason to be furious. In King's Landing, news travels faster than horses, faster than ravens, faster even than people switching loyalties. Only a few days after Catelyn Stark captured Tyrion in that innocent little roadside inn, the story had already slithered through every hallway, every tavern, every bored noble's mouth, until it reached Jaime Lannister's ears. And Jaime, a man who solves most problems with steel and a golden ego to match his armor, didn't need long to think. He only needed one sentence. "They captured my brother? Fine, I'll capture one of theirs." And just like that, it began. Sometimes family wars start with nothing more than a bad impulse and a bruised sense of pride. Ned Stark, meanwhile, wasn't looking for drama at all. He simply wanted to figure out who killed Jon Arryn, write a few reports, sigh a few times about how exhausting court life was. But Ned forgot a fundamental rule of Westeros. If you want peace, go back north. If you come to King's Landing, trouble will find you as quickly as wine finds Robert Baratheon. That afternoon, Ned was walking through the city with a few Stark guards. The air was thick with the usual blend of sea salt, garbage, and politics fermenting in the sun. From a distance came the sound of hooves, heavy, steady, like war drums announcing incoming trouble. And indeed, trouble arrived with golden hair, perfect horsemanship, and the personality of a furious stray cat, Jaime Lannister. He approached without a hint of courtesy, didn't even bother to dismount. He wore a smirk sharp and dangerous, like a blade polished with arrogance. "Your people captured my brother," Jaime said casually, as if discussing the weather. "I'm here for justice." Ned stayed calm, though hearing the word justice from Jaime made him almost choke. "Catelyn acted on her own. Tyrion will face a fair trial." Jaime laughed. One word, but enough to insult the entire Westerosi legal system in Safi in 2 seconds. There is no law stating a Stark can lay hands on a Lannister and still keep all his teeth. The tension snapped tight, ready to explode. Lannister guards lowered spears. Stark men drew swords. Everyone waited for the inevitable command, attack. But Ned had reason. Jaime had instinct. Two men from opposite worlds met each other's gaze, one symbolizing honor, the other efficiency. And the street suddenly became the stage for a free public duel. Steel clashed, sparks flew, horses neighed, a legendary knight against a northern lord, a scene worthy of being painted for generations. Jaime fought beautifully, almost poetically, light as wind, smiling as though savoring fine wine. Every swing of his sword carried the confidence of a man universally praised for his beauty. Ned fought like a worker, solid and practical. No flourishes, just clean, grounded technique. In the middle of the duel, Jaime still found time to mock. "If you weren't so stiff, you might keep up." Ned shot back. "If you weren't so faithless, you might be respected." Jaime burst out laughing. "Why would I need respect when I already have everything?" Steel turned again. Spectators held their breath, and just when the crowd expected an epic, honorable finish, Westerosi reality struck. A Lannister guard stabbed Ned from behind. A cheap, crude, shameless move, and perfectly aligned with the philosophy of winning is winning. The spear pierced Ned's leg. He collapsed. Gasps erupted. His sword fell. Everything froze, not out of respect for the wounded man, but because Jaime had lost interest. He glared at the guard who ruined his duel. "I told you to fight, not stab. Idiot." Then he looked at Ned, disappointment flickering behind his arrogance. A beautiful duel, ruined. A pity. Anyone watching would have asked, so, was he planning to lose beautifully? Answer, absolutely not. Jaime turned his horse, brushed imaginary dust off his golden armor, and delivered the final blow with words. I won't kill you today. I want you alive long enough to hear your family scream. A threat both elegant and vicious. He rode away, his cloak sweeping behind him like a declaration that laws exist only for poor people. Ned lay in the street, leg bleeding, clothes torn, honor bruised, and his belief in King's Landing's rules shattered into pieces. People gathered around, staring with sympathy mixed with familiarity. In this city, the bleeding of good men was just another Tuesday. A fishmonger muttered, "He's a Stark. Should have gone back north sooner." And indeed, King's Landing is no place for honorable men. In Westeros, those who believe in honor are crushed by those who believe in winning. Ned was carried back to the Red Keep, blood trailing behind him like a bright red exclamation mark of fate. He didn't die. But something else did. The fragile peace between the realm's two most powerful families. The wheel of war had been nudged, and now it would roll downhill with no brakes. Ned Stark lay in bed, his leg wrapped in bandages, his head pounding from the wound, and pounding even harder from the realization that King's Landing was basically a gigantic ant nest. Poke it lightly and ants crawl everywhere. Poke it hard and you get bitten to death. But Ned was still Ned. Even after being stabbed in broad daylight, he refused to lie still and breathe quietly. He chose the most rational option available in this chaotic city. He kept investigating. Another person might have understood that survival in King's Landing required two things, lying and closing your eyes. But Ned chose the hardest path. He opened a book. And that simple academic act, something no one in the capital had bothered to do for at least 3 years, led him straight to the truth everyone else was desperately trying to bury. Solar eclipses, lunar eclipses, astronomy? No. Ned was studying something far more terrifying. Baratheon hair genetics. He opened an old genealogy book, its cover frayed, its pages yellow and smelling like decaying centuries. The author had carefully recorded the appearance of every Baratheon heir. Robert, black hair. Robert's father, black hair. Robert's grandfather, black hair. Every legitimate Baratheon child for 300 years, black hair. Ned froze, the room so silent he could hear the candle crackling. Every Baratheon child, black hair. And Robert and Cersei's 3 children, blonde, all blonde, golden like autumn fields. In Westeros, some secrets require magic to decode, but others, they only require middle school biology. Ned realized a truth colder than the northern snows. None of Cersei's children were Robert's. He closed his eyes, not from exhaustion, but because every puzzle piece suddenly rearranged itself into a horrifying picture. Jon Arryn died because of this. His steward was killed because of this. The Lannisters hid it because of this. And Jaime stabbed Ned in the streets also because of this. The truth was simple, obvious, and more horrifying than any monster beyond the wall. The Iron Throne was being occupied by the incest-born children of Cersei and Jaime. A fact so grim that any respectable historian would smash his head against a wall out of despair. Ned wiped his face and sighed. In the North, truth is a weapon. In King's Landing, truth is a death sentence. But Ned remained Ned. When he found something wrong, he wanted to fix it immediately. He didn't understand that this heroic instinct was the express lane to the execution block. And so, in a moment, every Westeros historian wishes they could scream, "Don't do it," at him. Ned decided to confront Cersei Lannister directly. Yes. Ned Stark marched up to the most cunning woman on the continent and believed she would react like a model citizen. Cersei met him in the garden, golden hair glowing in the afternoon sun, beautiful, as a painting and as dark inside as a sky cell. Ned handed her the evidence. Cersei looked at him the way a teacher looks at a very honest but extremely naive student. Then she smiled. In this world, we make our own truths. A single sentence summarizing the Lannister philosophy. If the truth is inconvenient, create a new one. Ned clenched his fist. He wanted to be angry, but mostly he was tired. He said a line that would go down in history as the monument of honorable naivete. "I will tell the king." Cersei stepped closer, her eyes cold. "When you play the Game of Thrones, you win, or you die." A warning, a threat, and a slap to the face of anyone who still believed justice existed here. Ned looked at her, thinking only one thing. Being honorable in this place is exhausting. Then Robert returned from his hunt, a hunt where he was drunker than the boar chasing him. And the result, of course, he was mortally wounded, completing the cycle of speak boldly, act too late. On his deathbed, Robert asked Ned to write his final decree, and Ned, instead of writing Joffrey, wrote the rightful heir, a polite workaround from an honest man trying to bend the rules without lying. Cersei looked at that parchment and essentially thought, well, that's it. War. And she was right. The moment Ned discovered the truth about hair color and decided to speak moral righteousness out loud, his destiny changed course into darkness. In Westeros, scientific facts save no one, especially not facts that collide directly with the ambitions of a ruthless woman and a family that solves problems with gold or with spears. When Ned left Robert's room, his steps were heavy, not because of his injured leg, but because of the bomb he now carried inside his head, a bomb that, once detonated, would tear the kingdom apart. But Ned still believed truth could extinguish the fire. Too bad that in King's Landing, truth isn't water, it's oil. And someone was already reaching for a match, across the vast lands of the Dothraki, where the sun burns without mercy and the wind blows dust into every strand of hair. There was a man who truly believed he was born to wear a crown. Unfortunately, the only thing he inherited from his royal bloodline was delusion. Viserys Targaryen, a man who called himself the dragon, yet resembled more of a paper dragon caught in the rain. Viserys followed Khal Drogo's Khalasar like a shadow that had half its dignity scorched off by the sun. He didn't ride a horse. The Dothraki believed he was unworthy of riding, so he had to walk, and every step reminded him that being a king didn't protect him from sunlight or the contemptuous stares of nomads. In Viserys' mind, he was the rightful ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, master of fate, heir to the Iron Throne. In the eyes of the Dothraki, he was just a grimy, silver-haired man wandering around like a misplaced decorative item in a mighty army. But Viserys' most exceptional trait wasn't arrogance. Westeros had plenty of arrogant fools. It was his complete inability to read the room. Where silence was needed, he spoke. Where humility was needed, he yelled. Where intelligence was needed, he didn't have any. While his sister Daenerys slowly adapted to her new life, growing stronger, calmer, and earning respect, Viserys increasingly resembled a cat who had lost its bowl of milk. He watched Dany from afar, watched her being cherished by the Dothraki, and instead of being happy, he fumed as if the world was stealing his title of the biggest and most important sibling. One day, in Drogo's vast camp, Dany was gifted a stunning horse. To the Dothraki, horses are souls, not animals. To be gifted is not just an honor, it is acknowledgement. You are one of us. Dany was moved. Viserys stood at a distance, grinding his teeth. In his head, the sound of hooves mocked him. Look who's truly valued in the Targaryen family. He couldn't stand it. He stormed in, demanding Dany obey him, respect him, and remember he was the future king. But the Dothraki could read people faster than Viserys could spell Targaryen. They saw him approach, wild-eyed, trembling like someone about to do something monumentally stupid. Dany was serene, which only made him angrier. "You have no right to command me," she said softly. Viserys' face turned red, not shy, but boiling. He drew his sword and pushed it against her belly, completely forgetting that a dozen warriors stood around her who could tear him apart in 3 seconds. "Who kept you alive all these years, huh?" he shouted. The real answer was luck plus the universe's unusual patience. Right then, Khal Drogo walked in, his long hair bound in rings, leather armor glowing in torchlight, his footsteps heavy as thunder. Drogo didn't need to speak. He just had to look at Viserys, a look that evaporated all of the future king bravado like water on desert sand. Viserys instantly changed tone. I only want what was promised. I need an army. I am the king. Drogo raised a hand. The whole tent fell silent. You want a crown? Drogo said, voice low and solid as cracking stone. Viserys nodded eagerly. Yes, a crown for me. In that moment, everyone in the camp knew. This man had just dug his own grave with his own mouth. Drogo nodded, a small, beautiful, terrifying nod. Give him a crown, fit for a king. Then the show began. Not a coronation, but a graphic lesson on physics and stupidity. The Dothraki warriors dragged Viserys to the center of camp. He kicked, screamed, struggled, but his resistance was about as effective as a chick fighting a sandstorm. Drogo melted gold in a great pot, setting it over the fire. The metal bubbled, shifting from bright gold to blazing red, glowing like a dying sun. Viserys watched the molten gold, and for the first time in his life, understood that sometimes dreams come true in the most literal sense. Dany watched her brother with sad eyes, but no panic. She knew he had crossed too many lines. She had feared him once, pitied him, but this moment revealed something. Viserys had always been his own worst enemy. When the gold was ready, Drogo lifted the pot with his bare hands, because Drogo was Drogo and physics apparently respected him, then approached Viserys. Here, Drogo said, your golden crown, as you asked. 1 second later, splash. Molten gold poured onto Viserys's head. No long scream, just one short, sharp sound, an ending as clean as an exclamation point. He fell, no longer a king, no longer a dreamer, even recognizable. Drogo glanced at the body and delivered a line sharper than any blade. He was no dragon. Dragons do not burn. A sentence that slapped the entirety of Viserys's delusions into the dirt. And just like that, it was over. The self-proclaimed prince, the Iron Throne dreamer, the man who believed threats were a political language. A death both tragic and darkly funny in the harshest Westerosi way. The man who always wanted to wear a crown, finally did, just a little too hot to enjoy. And Daenerys? She watched without tears, without trembling. She simply exhaled, as if a heavy burden had finally slipped off her shoulders. A new chapter had begun, one where she would no longer be anyone's pawn. In the long history of kings, we've heard of rulers being assassinated, poisoned, overthrown, but getting nearly killed by a boar is pretty rare. Robert Baratheon, the king who once smashed Rhaegar Targaryen's chest like a watermelon, ultimately lost to a wild pig. Not a magical pig, not a cursed pig, just a normal boar plus 10 pounds of alcohol sloshing through his bloodstream. But before the fateful King versus Boar final showdown, we must talk about the general atmosphere in King's Landing. The city was already hot, humid, and full of the smells of fish, horses, and schemes. But the worst part was a 3-word forecast. Joffrey is coming. Just thinking about it made the sunny sky dim like a pre-storm omen. Robert, a man of feasts, hunts, and aggressive nostalgia, had grown so sick of governing that even looking at the Iron Throne made him want to turn around and head to the nearest tavern. Every day he grumbled about those damn Lannisters, the blasted council, that golden-haired boy who doesn't look much like me, while Ned Stark stood next to him like a walking alarm system saying, "You should get yourself together." Robert, of course, could not get himself together, mostly because he was drunk from breakfast until bedtime. One fine morning, King Robert decided to continue his sacred lifelong tradition, going hunting while outrageously intoxicated. To him, hunting without wine was like attending a feast without meat, a crime against the profession. The royal entourage followed him, including Lancel Lannister, whose job was to keep pouring wine until the king stops breathing. And young Lancel did his job very well. Too well. Robert stumbled into the forest, reeking of alcohol so heavily that everything from deer to squirrels scattered, except for one boar roughly the size of a wardrobe, with a temper problem. When Robert staggered forward, shouting and laughing, The beast took it as a declaration of war. It charged. And just like that, the king who overthrew the Targaryen dynasty got gored in the gut by a wild pig. If anyone ever doubted nature always balances itself, here was proof. Rhaegar died from Robert's hammer. Robert died from a boar's tusk. Life can be surprisingly polite. Robert was carried back, still drunk but in pain, supported by frantic attendants. They laid him on his bed, and that was when Ned Stark was summoned. The scene had the vibe of divine punishment after a binge. Robert lay there, breathing heavily, smelling like a mix of blood in an expensive tavern. Ned looked at his friend with a heavy heart. Robert looked back at Ned like a man staring at the last piece of fried chicken, full of love, but absolutely doomed. "What have I done with my life, Ned?" Robert rasped. "You enjoyed it too much," Ned answered, honest as a bucket of cold water thrown onto the soul. Robert laughed, then choked himself, coughing. A touching moment was about to happen, like two old brothers finally speaking their last truths. But since this was Westeros, emotional depth could never exist without absurdity. Robert asked Ned to write his will. He wanted Ned to serve as regent for my rightful heir. Say the name, Ned thought. Jon, Stannis. But Robert, half dying and half drunk, managed to utter, Joffrey. Ned froze. Joffrey, the golden-haired hellspawn, future destroyer of collective happiness, was being called rightful heir. Ned stared at Robert, then at the quill, then on the parchment. His mind spun like a wagon stuck in mud. Finally, Ned made a move that was both righteous and slightly sarcastic. He wrote, "My rightful heir." A merciful phrasing for a dying friend, but also a direct opening for Stannis, the only legitimate Baratheon heir. But it was also the sentence that would throw the entire continent into flames. Robert signed the will with a trembling hand, then fell asleep, a deep slumber of a man who had fought life long enough. Truthfully, he didn't die because of the wound alone, but because the alcohol made him incapable of telling a spear from a tree branch, a very on-brand death. While Robert lay dying, Cersei behaved as though waiting for a pizza delivery. She picked up the will, skimmed it, and stored it in a drawer. She didn't tear it, didn't burn it. She simply didn't care. Because she knew real power lay in the City Watch, in Lannister gold, and in Ned Stark's hopeless sincerity. Robert died. The city held its breath, not out of grief, but because the next person to sit on the throne would be Joffrey, a 13-year-old with the emotional stability of a kicked duck and the decision-making skills of a spoiled ferret. The kingdom entered a new era, one ruled by a child whose favorite hobbies included cruelty, tantrums, and ruining everything. And it all began with an overfilled wine jug and a boar with an attitude problem. In Westeros, the greatest tragedies often come from the smallest sparks: a promise, a drop of blood, a boar charging in the woods, and Robert's will, written in pain and soaked in alcohol, would become the fuse to every disaster that followed. Ned Stark, after drafting a half-useful but full of good intentions will, left Robert's chamber with the expression of a man who had just glimpsed the collapse of the future, but still insisted on rebuilding the walls with his bare hands. He carried with him his belief in honor, justice, and Stannis, the only truly legitimate heir. What he did not bring, sadly, was even the minimum suspicion required to survive in King's Landing. King's Landing, where the sun shines but shadows rule. And in those shadows lives a particular creature, thriving like a fish in black water. Peter, Littlefinger, Baelish, international grandmaster of betrayal, capable of selling out his best friend in the time it takes to pour a cup of wine. Ned went to Littlefinger to ask him to mobilize the City Watch in order to secure the throne for the rightful heir. In Ned's mind, the logic was very straightforward. Cersei is a traitor. Joffrey is not Robert's son. Stannis is the rightful successor. The City Watch will obey the king's dying wish. Perfectly reasonable. But only reasonable according to the moral education handbook taught in Winterfell. In actual Westeros, the rule is simple. Whoever pays more speaks louder. Littlefinger smiled as if Ned had just told a very good joke. He sprinkled in a few cryptic hints. "You are clever, my lord, but in this city, swords don't obey honor. They obey coin." Ned felt a northern chill go straight through his chest, but still he believed that if he simply did the right thing, everything would fall into place. A fatal mistake, equivalent to Bran deciding to climb a tower just for the view. On the day Robert died, the air in the Red Keep was thick enough to chew. Everyone was on edge except for Cersei, who had been preparing for this moment for about 3 seasons. She entered with Joffrey, carrying herself like someone about to perform a final quality check on the Iron Throne before officially sitting on it. Ned arrived with the city watch, holding Robert's will. He planned to declare, "By the king's decree, I, Ned Stark, am regent, and the rightful heir is Stannis Baratheon." A perfect plan, a complete speech, a justice-filled dramatic reveal. That is, until Littlefinger delivered the most iconic line of the season, "I did warn you not to trust me." What followed happened as fast as the blink before a beheading. The city watch, who had just sworn loyalty to Ned, pivoted in an instant and slaughtered the Stark guards right there in the throne room. Steel clashed, sharp and cold as northern ice. Ned stood in the middle, eyes wide, not in fear, but in the dawning realization that he had just lost the greatest political match in King's Landing, a match where the opponent didn't play white or black pieces, he played with gold. Cersei approached, taking Robert's will from Ned's hand like it was a discount flyer. She read a line, smiled, and then tore it apart before the entire court. No burning, no hiding, just tearing. Because to her, it wasn't a will. It was a dying man's scribble and a noble fool's wishful thinking. Joffrey, the boy with the eyes of someone who had never in his life faced consequences, stepped onto the throne as if he had been born for it. His smile resembled that of a kitten who had found a mouse trapped in a corner, helpless, terrified, and very entertaining. In that moment, Ned Stark, a man straight as northern timber, officially became the victim of life's cruel joke. He was seized, bound, and shoved forward under the horrified gaze of his daughter. King's Landing buzzed with scandalous excitement, but Ned felt only one thing. He had trusted the wrong man. Littlefinger leaned close, whispering with a razor-thin smile, "You should have learned how to play the game. Shame it's too late." It was the moment every viewer wanted to jump into the screen and slap him, but also had to admit he was doing what he did best: betrayal. The City Watch dragged Ned away while Cersei, Joffrey, and the entire court prepared for the kingdom's first Iron Throne live stream coronation. The scene looked exactly like a royal press conference where the guest of honor gets arrested during the opening minute. With one perfectly executed betrayal, Littlefinger hurled Westeros into chaos, burning every fragile hope of peace. Ned's honesty had collided with the capital's collective deceit, and the result was one man in chains, one kingdom entering civil war, and one schemer smirking with unbearable satisfaction. Joffrey sat on the throne forged from 1,000 enemies' swords, and spoke as if he had just won a school debate competition. Viewers stared at him, silently asking, "How did the world allow this child to become king?" And the answer rested in a very Westerosi shrug. Because life isn't fair, especially while Littlefinger is still alive. The news of Ned Stark's arrest swept across the north as fast as wind over a snowfield, leaving behind low growls, rising calculations, and a quiet, simmering fury inside every lord. Winterfell, usually as peaceful as a hill in deep winter, suddenly shook, like someone had dared poke a sleeping direwolf in the ribs. Robb Stark, a young man barely out of boyhood, brown-haired, blue-eyed, the one everyone still remembered as that Stark kid, suddenly became the center of all attention. From a boy who sparred for fun and chased his siblings around the yard, Robb now held the summons of war in his hand, and worse, he had to turn it into a command. It was the moment even he must have thought, "Wait, How did it suddenly become my job to be an adult? But in the North, growing up isn't required. Having Stark blood is enough to make a boy stand straight in the face of a storm. Rage spread quickly through House Karstark, Umber, Mormont. Every lord who entered Winterfell's great hall walked as if the wooden floor beneath them was trembling with their anger. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Their eyes all carried the same message. We are ready for war. Robb rode out at the head of the northern host, a sight both heroic and vaguely tinged with, does this kid actually know what he's doing? The veteran soldiers exchanged glances now and then, the kind that meant promotions this fast only happen in families with honor, but maybe not much strategic experience. And yet, none of them doubted him. Northerners don't need cunning leaders. They need someone who leads with his heart, not his purse or his schemes. When Robb marched south with over 20,000 men, the world seemed to shift. Hoofbeats thundered, the direwolf banner snapped in the wind, and anyone watching would know the northern storm was moving south, and storms don't care much about manners. But every storm has its inconveniences. Case in point, Walder Frey and his bridge. To cross the wide river, Robb had to negotiate with the old man, a creature so irksome he might as well have been the owner of the only convenience store open during a blizzard. Frey demanded conditions, honor, promises, and especially, marry one of my daughter's boy. Robb, trying hard to look like a serious lord, must have internally screamed, I'm here to save my father, not to join a dating show. But he agreed. Because in Westeros, every road to war is paved with contracts signed with some greedy old man. Once across, Robb planned his first real battle, and that battle was what made everyone reevaluate him. With a neat feint, he sent 2,000 men out as bait while the true force flanked and struck the real camp. The result? The Lannister forces showed their true nature, not great at archery, but excellent at panicking. Jaime Lannister, the most handsome knight in the Seven Kingdoms, was captured. An iconic moment. While others catch dragons or direwolves, Robb Stark caught House Lannister's golden boy for bargaining. The northern lords looked at Robb differently now. Karstark nodded. Maege Mormont folded her arms approvingly. Great John Umber laughed like he'd discovered his new favorite drinking buddy. The command tent that night buzzed with heat like a forge. Then came the moment that reshaped the entire North. One lord rose and shouted, his voice like thunder, he's no Southrun, he's one of ours. Another followed, I'll not bend the knee to the Iron Throne. And then the roar burst from all sides, burning through the air. The king in the North! Robb stood in the center, stunned and determined, a boy being named king in the North, a title borne by his ancestors centuries before him. This wasn't Robb becoming older. It was history choosing him. Outside, the wind seemed to shift direction, howling like wolves celebrating their new leader. The North rose, no longer a cold, suffering land, but a massive direwolf, and Robb was the one riding on its back. Yet behind the cheers lingered a whisper of gentle, mocking truth. A teenage boy raised in peacetime, enemies everywhere, allies fiery and unpredictable, father imprisoned. Yeah, nothing could possibly go wrong here. The North had chosen Robb. War had begun. And from that moment, the world stepped into the greatest dance of chaos it had seen in generations. While the South was exploding with vows, war councils, and thunderous cries of King in the North, loud enough to shake an entire forest of pines far to the very edge of the world, where the wind screamed louder than any war horn. Something else was happening, something quiet, something cold, something that, if Westeros had a list of things we should panic about immediately, should have ranked number 1. The Night's Watch, once noble as a knightly order, had decayed so badly that without their black cloaks, people might mistake them for a winter road-cleaning crew. At Castle Black, the wind howled through every crack in the wall, carrying with it the cold breath of things that didn't have names yet. In the South, people fought for the Iron Throne. Here, they fought to see who got to sleep closest to the fire and avoid freezing to death. Jon Snow, the boy who had left Winterfell not long ago, had now learned that the distance between thinking you're cool and realizing you're dumb was exactly one step taken atop the wall. He once dreamed of heroism, only to discover his brothers-in-arms were criminals, beggars, and society's leftovers, a force that, if the White Walkers really came, might successfully frighten one reindeer at best. But then, strange things began to happen. One morning, a patrol found two bizarre corpses out in the icy forest, rangers who had been missing for days. What chilled everyone wasn't their death, but that the bodies didn't rot. The cold might slow decay, yes, but it didn't explain why those dead eyes stared wide open as if still seeing straight into the souls of the living. The bodies were brought back to Castle Black the same way one brings wet firewood into a house. Nobody wanted them inside, but nobody dared leave them outside either. Bowen Marsh, the steward, stared at them and shuddered. They look like they'd get up if you tapped them. If Tyrion had been there, he would have said, "Then don't tap." That night the northern wind screamed like a long, angry cry, slamming against the stone walls until Castle Black sounded like a massive drum. And right when everyone drifted into uneasy sleep, a faint noise came from the room where the corpses were kept. When the guard arrived, the sight before him was enough to make even a steel-nerved soldier consider a career change. One of the corpses was standing, skin cracked like old wood snapping, its blue eyes glowing with ancient frozen light. It didn't scream, didn't groan. It simply moved with one intent, one purpose, one mission: kill something alive. And that something was Jorah Mormont, the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. The attack happened so fast that no one had time to shout. The White, a walking death machine, lunged at Mormont. The old bear fought with all the fury of a man who'd lived his entire life in the north. But what could he use? A hammer, a sword, a stick? None of it mattered, because his enemy was something that had already died once and decided to get back up for round two. Luckily, Jon Snow, the only person at Castle Black awake like someone suffering lifelong insomnia, heard the commotion. He burst into the dark room, the torch in his hand blazing. He didn't think, he just acted. Wham! He slammed the burning torch into the White's face. That was the moment Castle Black learned a simple truth. Only fire can kill something that died and then decided to walk again. The White went up in flames, shrieking with a sound that wasn't human, more like wind slicing through stone. Its body writhed on the floor, burning into pieces, leaving behind a smell so foul that everyone wished they had been born without a sense of smell. When it was over, Jorah Mormont sat up, brushed ashes off his cloak, and looked at Jon like the boy had just saved the whole wall from collapsing. "Boy," he rasped, "you've done something no one's managed in years. You woke me up." After that night, no one dared call the return of the White Walkers a bedtime story. The men of the Night's Watch began looking at each other with wide, worried eyes, the eyes of people silently thinking, when did I sign up for this, and is it too late to get a refund? Even though the South was gearing up for war, Robb marching, the Lannisters plotting, here at the top of the world, another threat was rising from the shadows. Not debt collectors, not a drunk king, not a spoiled prince with the emotional stability of a walnut, but the pale shadows, ancient visitors of old legends, now returned with eyes so blue they made the winter jealous. And the sad part was, Westeros was far too busy killing each other to notice. While Jon Snow was off in the far north, fist-fighting a reanimated corpse and nearly earning the job title professional body-burning technician, a very different kind of dark comedy was unfolding several thousand miles farther south. House Stark, the somber, honorable, emotionally constipated clan we all know, suddenly found itself in possession of Jaime Lannister, the most handsome swordsman in the Seven Kingdoms, as if they'd just picked up a shiny loot drop that looks valuable, but comes with complicated user instructions. After Robb Stark's first military victory, and the spectacular bonus prize of capturing Jaime, the young wolf instantly became a tactical celebrity. The Northern Lord stood on the battlefield with the stunned expression of people witnessing a miracle. Wait, he actually caught Jaime Lannister in his first battle? Some of them seriously wondered if Robb had secretly signed a sponsorship deal with the God of Luck. Jaime, bound hand and foot and tossed onto the ground like a sack of potatoes, except potatoes are quiet and Jaime definitely isn't, still managed to smirk with the air of someone thinking, "You people have no idea what you're doing." And he didn't look like a prisoner. He looked like someone temporarily inconvenienced. More than one Stark soldier had to walk past him with a straight face, resisting the urge to snort into their helmets. Jaime Lannister possessed a special talent. Even tied up and shoved into the dirt, he somehow still looked expensive. Perhaps the combination of Kingslayer and scandalously attractive creates that effect. Even in chains, he looked like he belonged on a movie poster. Robb stared at him, unsure whether this was a strategic asset or a decorative hazard. But regardless of personal feelings, every Northern Lord understood one thing clearly. They had just caught the Lannisters' most valuable card. And in the political chessboard of Westeros, a valuable card isn't for display, it's for bargaining. When news of Jaime's capture reached the Lannister camp, Tywin Lannister, the only man alive capable of glaring someone into premature aging, erupted in silent fury. Everyone nearby suddenly had the urge to hide under a table. Tywin had faced dozens of battlefields in his life, but perhaps none as humiliating as this. The enemy had captured the prettiest Lannister, an aesthetic tragedy. And the way Jaime was caught only made it worse, not because he was overwhelmed by chaos and bloodshed, but because he walked directly into Robb's trap. A simple trap. A beginner-level military trick. So simple that if Tyrion had been present, he probably would have sighed, "Oh, Jaime, your reflexes really aren't as sharp as your hair is shiny, are they?" Meanwhile, in the north, victory tasted sweet, but Jaime's value tasted sweeter. Robb Stark quickly realized, want to get his father back? Jaime is the key. Want a temporary truce? Jaime is the leverage. Want to annoy the Lannisters for sport? Jaime is the deluxe edition. Mormont, Karstark, Umber, everyone had an opinion. Some demanded a prisoner exchange. Some wanted to execute Jaime on the spot. Great John Umber, always enthusiastic, proposed hanging Jaime on a wall as a strategic decoration. Robb, in his best attempt at being a mature leader, had to say, "No one touches him. Jaime alive is worth more than gold." A sentence that sounded very lordly, even though inside Robb was still a 16-year-old, desperately hoping not to make the wrong move. Meanwhile, in his prisoner tent, Jaime sat tied, but not silenced. His mouth was still fully operational. He mocked everything. The food, the guards, the accommodations, Robb's age. "Who are you?" Jaime asked. "Robb Stark." "Oh, the boy." A warm Lannister-style greeting. Even in chains, Jaime radiated confidence. He knew Tywin would pay any price to get him back. He knew the Lannisters had money, power, and, most importantly, a deep cultural commitment to revenge. But Jaime miscalculated one thing. Robb Stark was not Ned Stark. Robb didn't play by the rules of honor and honesty. He played by Northern rules. "You hurt my family. I hit back twice as hard." With every passing day, Robb's instincts sharpened. He studied Jaime, a political bargaining chip, a war trophy, and the lifeline that could bring his father home. To Robb, Jaime wasn't just a prisoner, he was a message, and the entire continent would receive it loud and clear. Down south, the Lannister camp grew tense. When Jaime didn't return, Cersei nearly ripped her cloak apart in panic. Tywin remained seated, eyes blazing like forge fire. He didn't shout, he didn't scold, he simply stared at the map and said, "They want to play big? We'll play bigger." War intensified. Wolves and lions lunged at each other, and Jaime, the man once thought untouchable, became a pawn dragged between two armies like some rare, overpriced collectible at a Westerosi flea market. The most ironic part? The man who killed a king was now tied up by a boy who hadn't even grown a full beard. The universe does love poetic justice, especially when it's funny. In an ideal world, when a man like Ned Stark is imprisoned for doing the right thing, the people would hold a fair trial, review the evidence, and reach a sensible conclusion. But this is Westeros, a place where justice is mostly used as interior decoration. And the one presiding over justice now is Joffrey Baratheon, a teenager whose emotional stability sits somewhere between a melting pastry and a startled goose. After Littlefinger's legendary betrayal, Ned Stark was thrown into a dungeon. The cells of King's Landing weren't so much a prison as a retirement home for people who made the mistake of trusting the wrong person. Ned, once a mighty northern lord, was now a bearded, broken man sitting in the dark with a shattered leg, aching bones, and one devastating thought. Everything he'd done to protect his family had blown up in his face. Meanwhile, Joffrey was reveling in his newfound spotlight. He strutted through the Red Keep like a peacock showing off its feathers, arrogant, preening, and absolutely convinced the world had been created to admire him. If there were an award for most unfit person to ever sit on a throne, Joffrey would win it in record time. Cersei, in contrast, was desperately trying to keep things less barbaric. Her plan: force Ned to confess treason in public, then send him to the wall. A neat, tidy solution that would avoid civil war and keep Westeros intact. But this plan had one fatal flaw. Joffrey existed. The day of the execution, or outdoor public theater day, according to King's Landing taste, arrived with clear skies. Crowds flooded in as if attending a festival. Sansa stood among them, trembling, praying Joffrey would keep his promise. At her age, she still believed the world was a romantic play, where princes always honored their word. Oh, sweet summer child. Ned was brought out, hair disheveled, face worn, but with a flicker of hope in his eyes. He saw the crowd, his daughter, and Joffrey perched beneath a makeshift royal canopy. Ned knelt and confessed to crimes he never committed, all to save his daughters. It was tragic, painful, deeply stark, honor shattered, but love unbroken. This should have been the moment Joffrey said, "Very well, let him live." The crowd would cheer, the city would sigh in relief. But Joffrey had no interest in happy endings. His only joy was doing the exact opposite of what he should. He stood up, voice ringing with disturbing excitement. "Bring me his head." Cersei went pale. The council panicked. The people screamed. Sansa nearly collapsed. And Joffrey? He smiled, the bright, innocent smile of youth hiding a razor-sharp, high-definition evil inside. The executioner stepped forward. The air cracked like breaking glass. Ned looked up at the sky one last time, and in a single heartbeat, so fast most people didn't even process it, the great sword of Cyril in pain swung down. And that was it. One stroke. Winter truly began. The head that once fought to save the realm now lay on a cold block of wood, looking like newly delivered merchandise. The crowd fell silent. The north broke. All of Westeros trembled. Joffrey stood proudly, as if he'd accomplished something heroic, when in truth he had just activated total chaos mode for the entire world. If a political IQ detector were placed beside him, it would have exploded trying to measure the sheer stupidity and cruelty. Sansa screamed. Cersei pulled her son back. The hound carried Sansa away. Loyalty shattered. Steel in the hands of northern lords vibrated with rage. When Robb heard the news, the wind through his camp suddenly felt colder, as if the world itself growled in warning. In all this horror, one truth stood clear. Ned Stark did not die for treason. He died because he trusted the wrong people, in the wrong place, at the wrong time, and because he shared the world with Joffrey Baratheon. His death, senseless and tragic, became the spark that would burn the Seven Kingdoms to ashes. Joffrey thought he was eliminating a threat. In reality, he had just signed his own death warrant, and Westeros's. But like all dangerously stupid people, Joffrey had no idea. He simply sat on the throne, crossed his legs, and pretended to be important. Meanwhile, beyond the Red Keep, Robb Stark was crowned king in the north. House Lannister braced for the coming storm, and the north whispered, "Blood for blood." A chapter closed, a catastrophe opened, and Westeros slipped into the longest night of its history, far from the furious shouts in the north, and far from Ned Stark's freshly fallen head. Daenerys Targaryen was drifting toward a fate darker than any storm Westeros could imagine. If the shadow Joffrey cast was one of stupidity, then the one falling over Dany was destiny, the kind that crushes whoever stands beneath it. When Khal Drogo was alive, Dany believed she had finally escaped a life controlled by her brother Viserys, who treated her like a clearance sale puppet. But fate, with its signature dark sense of humor, whispered, "Not so fast, girl." Drogo, strong as a mountain, handsome as a carved statue, legendary in every way, collapsed because of a tiny cut in battle. And because nothing in Game of Thrones is ever tiny, it festered, worsened, and brought down the great call of the endless plains in mere weeks. Daenerys panicked. A lifetime of being ruled had finally shifted, and just when she touched power with her fingertips, she was shoved downhill with ruthless efficiency. Her idiot brother Viserys, may his golden crown rest in peace, was gone, leaving her with a few valuable things: 3 dragon eggs, the title of Khal Drogo's Khaleesi, a Dothraki horde rapidly losing interest in her, and a heart crushed by the loss of her husband and unborn child. But the worst part was the choice she made next, turning to the Maegi Miri Mazdur to save Drogo. Dany thought she was placing hope into the hands of a healer. In truth, she handed her future to a woman with a heart so black even crows would avoid it. Inside the dark tent, the chant of blood magic seeped out like a funeral dirge. Dany cried, believing the ritual would save her husband, but instead, it stole the life inside her womb, one life for another, a cure with a price so brutal it felt like a nightmare carved into reality. Drogo woke, but not really. He breathed, only breathed. He didn't speak, didn't look, didn't exist. He was alive the same way a stone is alive when the sun heats it. Dany cupped his face in her hands, tears shining as if asking, why? But the answer lay before her. She had been desperate enough to trust magic, and magic had never been kind, especially not in Essos. When a woman loses everything, she usually has 2 choices: collapse or rise. Daenerys chose the third option: burn everything behind her and walk forward into the fire. That night, the desert wind howled, whispering ancient tales through the grass. Dany ordered a massive pyre to be built, placing Drogo upon it like a fallen monument. Miri Mazdur, bound and still laughing with the cruelty of someone who enjoys watching the world rot, was tied close by. Dany whispered her final words to her Khal, then lit the fire. Flames roared upward, swallowing the night. The smell of sap, burning hair, scorched flesh, all of it drifted across the silent plain. Everyone expected the young Khaleesi to stand at a distance, watch her past burn, and then disappear into the desert. But Daenerys Targaryen was not everyone. She walked straight into the fire. Chaos erupted. The remaining Dothraki screamed, stumbled backward, fell to their knees, or ran like the night itself had risen to claim them. Only the flames understood the truth, and they embraced her, wrapped her like a royal cloak. The fire rose so high it swallowed the stars. At dawn, when the ashes settled and the smoke thinned, those who dared look saw what should have been impossible. Daenerys stood there, unburnt, unbroken, unshaken. Beside her, 3 baby dragons clung to life, red-skinned, soft-winged, blinking up at her as if recognizing their mother. The Dothraki dropped to their knees. Some whispered, "Azor Ahai? The prince that was promised? Child of fire?" But everyone agreed on one thing. The woman before them was no longer Drogo's young bride. She was the mother of dragons. The irony of fate was delicious. Viserys spent his whole life wanting dragons and died by gold. Dany never asked for anything and got 3 dragons. Somewhere in the ruins of ancient Valyria, the ancestors were probably laughing. That's the Targaryens for you. Dragons are born only when the tragedy is big enough. From those ashes, Daenerys stepped forward, not with tear-filled eyes, but with the blazing stare of someone who now possessed 3 reasons to reshape the world. A new age dawned. Dragons had returned after centuries of silence, and Dany? She had lost everything, but gained something Westeros would soon learn to fear. Westeros now looked like a banquet table after a chaotic wedding feast. a severed head lying in King's Landing, dragons hatching in fire across the sea in Essos, the north breaking away as its own kingdom, White Walkers waving hello from the far north like mischievous children about to press the apocalypse button. From south to north, from coast to forest, the whole continent trembled with tiny cracks, cracks that would later split into wars, so massive people would look back and say, Season 1 was really just a warm-up jog. In King's Landing, Joffrey sat on the Iron Throne, the way someone might sit on a loaded mousetrap, blissfully believing it was a massage chair. He laughed, barked random orders, executed anyone whose face mildly annoyed him, and made decisions that could only come from the kind of mind developing in entirely the wrong direction. The royal court watched him with the expression of people unsure whether they should leave the room or leave the entire kingdom. In the north, Robb was hailed as the King in the North, but everyone secretly knew this title felt like opening a business during an economic crisis. Prestigious, yes, but one wrong breath and the whole floor collapses. Still, through the howling winds and the fierce determination in the eyes of the Stark bannermen, there was a stubborn spark of hope. They would not kneel to the lions. Beyond the wall, the Night's Watch stared at the creeping darkness in the far north, a moving storm cloud with murderous intentions. Jon Snow was beginning to understand. The phrase, "winter is coming," wasn't a poetic slogan. It was an advance notice to start preparing escape routes. And in Essos, Daenerys Targaryen, the girl who had been sold, betrayed, stripped of everything, now stood in the ashes with 3 newborn legendary creatures screeching like funeral bells for the whole world. No throne, no castle, no army, but she held the one thing every ambitious ruler feared losing sleep over: dragons that could fly, breathe fire, and burn down the past with professional efficiency. A continent now filled with an unhinged teenage king, a rising dragon queen, a brewing family war, ice demons marching in silence, and millions of innocent people trapped in the crossfire of those who loved showing off power. If any gods actually watched over Westeros at this moment, they were probably sighing, "This is why we can't leave you kids alone for 1 minute." Season 1 closed. No peace, no clear hope, just the inescapable sense that everything was about to collapse and every faction was holding its own personal torch. One question hung in the dark sky: who will survive and who will fall? But if Game of Thrones taught us anything from the very beginning, it's this: the good die first, fools become kings, dragons hatch when the world burns, and winter always arrives on schedule. A period ends for one chapter, and a period begins for the longest nightmare Westeros will ever know.